This is a Queens-bound M train via the E line. The next stop is 23rd Street.
Is she okay?
Blood clots don't wait for the right time. They never discern the when, the where, or the who.
Ma'am?
They just strike, indiscriminately.
We need an ambulance.
Every 6 minutes, somebody in America dies of a blood clot.
We're here to change that statistic. Welcome to Taking a Breath, a Stop the Clot podcast.
A podcast dedicated to bringing awareness of the dangers of blood clots from the clotting disorders community to the world.
With the help of many notable blood clot survivors, we are here to give you the knowledge and the skills you need to prevent this silent killer.
My name is Leslie Lake. I am the president of the National Blood Clot Alliance, and I am a blood clot survivor.
And my name is Todd Robertson. I'm the patient engagement liaison for the National Blood Clot Alliance, and I am a 6-time blood clot survivor.
And we're here to stop the clot. Oftentimes, advocacy begins with vulnerability. Hearing the stories of those who struggled before you sheds insight to the overlooked symptoms, common occurrences, and vibrant victories like a light at the end of a horizonless tunnel. Our guest today is someone whose advocacy shines like a beacon of hope for the clotting community of tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming attorney, mother, and patient advocate, the endlessly amiable and forever inspiring Traci Wilkes Smith.
My journey with blood clots began when I was 25 years old. I had just finished law school and started working in New York City as a young associate. I was working long hours. I was commuting by train into New York City from New Jersey at the time. And I started to feel not like myself. At 25, when you're supposed to be healthy and, active and on the move and ready to go with your new career and inspired by, all the big things that are coming, my health started to decline. And it happened unexpectedly, obviously, and slowly. But then again, it caught me off guard. So I remember pretty vividly, even to this day, trying to walk up the steps in the train station in New York City. And I remember after a short while, I started to be out of breath. I'd be a couple steps in and, I couldn't breathe. And I had a difficulty, getting to the top of the steps in the train station. And when it's a hot summer afternoon in New York City and you can't get to the top of the train steps, that's a problem at 25 years old. So that started happening. I had difficulty breathing, difficulty, walking, started to get some pain in my thigh. That was completely, out of I wasn't active. I wasn't doing anything except working at the time. So that was surprising. So what happened was I that summer, I went to a couple of doctors and I had some tests. And the tests that they did on me were some tests for an ultrasound. And that was completely, not necessary because my symptoms were in my leg. And then another doctor said, hey, you potentially have a muscle strain in your leg. And they prescribed some medicine for that, which I took, hoping that the pain would go away, but it didn't. So I spent, that summer in pain in my thigh, and I was, unable to work. It became a big issue for me because I was suffering. By the fall that same year, I wound up traveling to my aunt's house, and she lived in Florida. So I figured, this is a good time to a good place to go and rest and relax. And I get to Florida and I wind up spending my entire time there, literally laying on the floor and trying to get comfortable because my back was hurting me. So, now I'm faced with some new symptoms that I can't even imagine. And they were just as scary and just as painful. I flew back from Florida. I got back up to New York and I was, trying to work and trying to be the best I can. I remember that one day when I was walking with groceries in the city, I had these bags and I couldn't carry the bags. I couldn't do it. I was just like, I can't even carry groceries anymore. This is not right. So I went back to the ER and I tried to, explain my symptoms and what was happening. And I felt like I got brushed off. There were no answers for me. So a couple more weeks went by and the holidays came and I'm, now getting more concerned. My family's nervous about, my declining health. And I, fast forward Christmas, I wound up laying up, in my bed at the time, and I couldn't sleep flat, like fully back. When I did that, I found it even more troubling to breathe. And so I sat up all night and I said, you know what, I'm literally taking my last breath. So I got to go back, got to try again and go to, the ER and see if there's going to be something else, to solve this. I called my mother and I said, Mom, please, help me, take me to the ER. And we went together and this visit was different. We wound up speaking with a pulmonary doctor, somebody that treats the lungs in particular. And he asked me about my health history. He asked me about anything that I could tell him about, how my grandparents had, maybe passed away. And my grandfather actually had passed away from blood clots. He asked me about my parents, and I said, hey, my father actually suffers from blood clots. And so it was almost like, everything changed in that moment, because right away he said, hey, I want you to have a test. And so I went and had another test. This test fortunately showed that I had blood clots in my stomach. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks and the blood clots were in my abdomen, and they also traveled to both of my lungs on the right and left side. So they were really large. I was on a blood thinner in the hospital, and I wound up getting out of the hospital after those 2 weeks, and then I was home for almost a year recovering. I stopped working. I just really wanted to decide what I wanted to do next and just had to rebuild myself physically. It took a while. It was, I was very lucky to have support with my family, but I was definitely in a time where my body wasn't the 25-year-old, healthy body. And so my lungs needed to repair. I needed to be able to learn, how to sit up and without feeling as though I have pressure and compression in my lungs. And then also my leg and my abdomen had a lot of discomfort for all that time. So it took a while for that to get better as well. Then my journey, continued with me starting to build a community within the blood clot space. And so I reached out to the National Blood Clot Alliance and got really active. I started to, really take on this cause because I felt as though, I almost died and I was suffering way too long. And because I didn't fit the profile of somebody that, might have a blood clot, I think I was misdiagnosed. I just became a patient advocate and got really heavily involved with the organization. With that journey, it gave me a lot of information and understanding about the signs and symptoms of blood clots. And I really wish I had known, that information before, because, obviously I'm alive, but it could have gone the other way. So, and that scares me to say that now, but it's just the truth. So, I did that for a good number of years, a couple of years. And then I wound up, getting into my career in media. And then fortunately I got married and I have 2 kids. And so, it's been quite a journey, especially with having children and being a blood clotter. So I had to, there was a lot of planning and conversations with my doctors in order to prevent blood clots. And, that journey was really, both times was, really difficult and challenging, but obviously worth it in the end. I just like to share my story and be as supportive to any other family that, lost a loved one because of blood clots, because, it's affected me my entire life. I've been saved, and, I'm thankful for that every day. And if I can, extend my time and energy to a family that's suffering, then I'm here to do that. So there are tough conversations and tough moments, but everybody needs support in life. And, I was able to find support in this community during my difficult times. And I want to be just as supportive to others who are going through this and through the pain of either surviving a blood clot or, obviously having a loss. But really does, help your mental state to be around others that understand. And so for me, it's been very, rewarding. I think that the key here is understanding and being aware of signs and symptoms. I am very familiar with my body. I'm very familiar with the signs. When a blood clot travels to my lungs, I know what that feels like. And so, being that aware of, what it feels like to have a blood clot in my leg or have a blood clot in my lung, I think that gives me more peace. And I'm able to, know that confidently that if I have a blood clot, I know what to do, but, obviously I still get nervous and, it's not a good feeling, and it's a concern. And, there's still the blood clot could, take my life. And so, I just have to be mindful. So I'm a very positive person. I understand my blessings. I walk with that. And then I try to be aware and self-aware. And I think that helps me and gives me peace in this journey because there's so many various obstacles in life and challenges, health challenges that come up as you age. And so, I just have to say, listen, I'm thankful for another day and, hopefully, not going to take me away and stay in that mindset. And that really helps me get through.
Some people sneeze when they take in sunlight. Some people have a genetic predisposition to certain types of cancer. Like all other genetic inheritance, someone's susceptibility to a clotting disorder is no different. With us to discuss the differences between genetic predisposition for clotting and trauma-induced clotting, here is Dr. Elliot Hout.
So one of the risk factors for blood clots of all types are genetically inherited factors. So there's something in an individual person's DNA that's an abnormality that puts them at higher risk. Patients can have, because of the way genes work, you can have one copy of the bad gene or two copies of the bad gene. So a normal person with 0 copies has the lowest risk. A person with one copy of the bad gene has a little higher risk. And a person with 2 copies of the gene, they're called homozygous, they have the highest risk from this inherited risk factor. So those patients, it's not that you're always 100% of the time going to get a blood clot if you have these risk factors, but it increases your chance of getting a blood clot exponentially. So it's really important for us to try to figure out, is that the reason a person had a blood clot, or is it related to something else? We call these either provoked or unprovoked. So if you crash your car, you come to the hospital, you have a really severe injury, and you get a blood clot related to it, we would call that a provoked blood clot. We would treat you for a certain amount of time and then stop your blood thinner therapy after a certain period of time, and you might not need it forever. That's different than an unprovoked, where you just come in, your first sign or symptom is a big swollen leg or shortness of breath. You come into the emergency department and you're diagnosed with one of these blood clots, either a DVT or PE. If we can't figure out a reason, then we would call that unprovoked, and we might treat that differently. So some people would push to always do genetic testing. Other people would say you don't need to do genetic testing. Some people would say we treat for a period of time. And the standard therapy used to be 6 months. Now maybe you can do 3 months, but you treat for a period of time with a blood thinner. And then you might want to, recheck and make sure the deep vein thrombosis is gone. And then you could stop that blood thinner and see how people do. That's certainly a reasonable approach. The other option is you might need to be on a blood thinner for life. And this is where the concept of shared decision-making ends up really, really important. So this is where a patient would want to talk to their doctor and figure out what's the risk for them. What's my risk of developing another blood clot versus my risk of staying on these blood thinners. These blood thinners are not benign, and they put you at bleeding risk for other things. You're at higher risk of bleeding after injury. You're at higher risk of having a spontaneous bleed or where some bleeding starts when it's not supposed to. So putting somebody onto one of these blood thinners forever has some risk with it. But then there's also this risk, if we take you off, you might have another blood clot. So that's why it's really important to talk to your doctor and try to figure out what's the risk of A versus B, which risks would you prefer? Why do you think those risks, like what are your individual risk factors for another blood clot? Or what are your risk factors for having a bleeding related complication? And that's where you're going to have to decide as an individual patient, what's the best thing for me?
Traci, 25 years old, you have gone to the ER a couple times, like you had the fortitude to keep going back. A lot of people don't. It's a really hard thing to do to advocate for yourself. So I want to ask you, what can you share with the audience, women in particular, but Black women even more so? How do you help people advocate for themselves?
Listen, that's what a question. And, thank you for asking it. What I would say is, listen, continue to fight for yourself and, continue to believe that you should be here and that you matter, and that you're loved. And even if the institutions might be brushing you away a little bit, know that. So, I was, fortunate to have access to healthcare. Not everybody is. And I think that's a really big problem with the institutions, are not accessible to everybody. That wasn't my journey, but I made sure that I use the healthcare systems that are, I had, that I'm accessible to. And so, whatever you can do, whatever doctors are, you're familiar with, that are your friends, that are in your community, that you can speak with, that you can ask questions to, do so, right? If there's a doctor of color that that you feel more comfortable speaking with about some of the symptoms you might have, do so. Ask that doctor, call on that person, call on the community nurse, call on the community health advocate. My say is don't give up, fight for your health and to be seen sometime in life. And this is what it is. Otherwise it can go any way.
So you have factor V Leiden and you got tested. It came back, obviously. You learned a lot about the results and the impact that it has on blood clots. How did that make you feel? And what do you do with that information? We hear a lot from patients. They want to be tested, but physicians don't want to test them. So how did you kind of reconcile getting tested with the results? Like, how do you deal with that within your own family, I guess, first and foremost? And then for patients who do want to be tested but kind of get brushed off again, what do you say to them?
So I have a gene that I inherited from my grandfather and my father that I clot more than others, right? So it explained a lot. And with that information, fast forward, 20 years, I've been able to make better decisions, about, how do I handle childbirth? How do I handle any other surgeries that I have to have? Because I know that I clot more than others, and it's genetic. I'm glad I have that information. And I would want others to be able to do the same, to be able to get that test so they have the information so that they can hopefully make, sound decisions, with their life. Should I be on blood clot, thinners? Should I be on blood thinners the rest of my life? Well, since I know that, I can clot more than others, then the answer is yes. Most likely I should be. Without that information, you're kind of in the blind in life. So I would say, please, it's a call to action to, have that accessible for everybody to be able to get, genetic tests to see, where they land. So much so that I went ahead and had my children tested to see if they are clotters at a young age. I was very, very keen on doing that, and focused on asking their pediatricians to do that test. And I will do so again because it's going to matter.
Traci, I want to thank you for joining us today. Your personal story is amazing. It was riveting. And we know that it takes a lot of courage to share it. But by sharing your story, we also know that you're going to save a lot of lives. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me, Leslie. It's been such a great conversation, and I really appreciate you having me here today.
It cannot be overstated the importance of communication when dealing with blood clots. From previously unseen symptoms to the genetic likelihood of certain diseases to bestowing tools to those at the beginning of their clotting journey, so much of your power in this fight comes from a conversation. When we speak up, we save lives, sometimes even our own.
We want to thank Traci for sharing her story with us today, and to thank you for joining us here on Taking a Breath. A special thank you to Dr. Elliot Hout from Johns Hopkins for sharing his endlessly useful insight into all things clotting. For more information on risk, prevention, and community, please visit stoptheclot.org.
We know the patient because we are the patient. Together with listeners like you, we can collectively stop the clot.
Another Everything Podcast production. Visit everythingpodcast.com, a division of Pattison Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast.